Right, crime in South Africa continues to thrive. The past few weeks, mass shootings have been the biggest topic, with such incidents recorded in various parts of the country. It's believed these are mostly driven by organized crime groups. But what needs to be done to contain the situation? Well, criminologist Guy Lamb says the country needs stricter firearm laws, among other things. He joins us now from Cape Town to tell us more. Mr. Lamb, thank you very much for your time. Is it fair for us to say that this is something that's organized, especially when you look at the fact that sometimes these shootings happen in one day, in a single day?
Well, in the sense of coordination, clearly, it doesn't seem to be there at the moment. I mean, these groups that are perpetrating this sort of violence are kind of organized in their own way, but what seems to be driving the violence seems to be quite local. So there seems to be a specific issue, a specific concern that's motivating this violence. The one thing that does connect it all together is accessibility to illegal firearms and illegal ammunition. But the sense of there doesn't seem to be some wider coordination that's going on at the moment, although there's potentially a possibility that some groups may be facilitating access to these illegal firearms, but that's entirely speculation at the moment. But these are largely local issues, but perpetrated by organized groups.
We've seen this, these crimes, particularly in KZN and a lot here in Gauteng. Every second day or so, we're hearing about 2 or 3 people being shot dead in this particular province. Is there more we should look into when it comes to that? Is it about our population, our large population, and the fact that we are one of the 2 economic hubs of the country?
I mean, if we look at the stats, I mean, the sort of 4 provinces are Gauteng, Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal. And so Gauteng, we've certainly seen a major increase in murders in the past, certainly for the first 3 months of this year, we saw increases. But if we're looking at these kind of mass shootings, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Western Cape probably are the top 3 on these. And, there has to be different factors. I mean, for example, within the Western Cape, we've seen a lot of the mass shootings due to gang conflicts and gang violence, so competition between the gangs, and then reprisal attacks. And you sort of see these drive-by shootings and shootings that are happening, in kind of areas where you've got sort of gangs that are living and working from. We've also seen extortion conflicts and crime going on, and there's been violence associated with that. So Khayelitsha and to a degree Gugulethu and Mfuleni and a few other places in the Western Cape have kind of seen a number of these shootings. In Gauteng, there's been obviously a lot of focus. So we had the shooting that saw 16 people die in Soweto. And that's been around, what the speculation is there. It has to do with kind of conflicts involving illegal miners or zama-zamas, which, flares up every now and again, but also seems to be kind of connected to conflicts that have been taking place in KwaZulu-Natal as well. And we've seen that happen. So KwaZulu-Natal has a particular history of kind of intergroup violence and then reprisal for that intergroup violence. And so it's had some political dimensions to it, but also it's had some, more social connections to it. And that often that conflict then gets transported to Gauteng when you see groups of people who are working in Gauteng and then on the holidays go back to KwaZulu-Natal. So we've seen these kind of issues happening. I mean, one area is like Masego, where that happens fairly regularly, for example. Then, of course, there's, a lot of the minibus taxi violence, and that happens throughout the country. But if you're asking questions about Gauteng, a lot of that also has to do with robberies. So we've seen the shootings in Alexandra, for example, were linked to groups who were robbing people and using violence to do that. And of course, this happens in other places as well. But Gauteng is, quite a dense population, and as a result, there's more maybe more accessibility to firearms as well, which might explain this. But each city and province does have its own dynamics.
I just wonder, like you said, Gauteng is one of the 4, provinces that are mentioned quite a lot when crime stats are released by police, etc. So I just wonder, is it because there's a heightened reporting around the shootings that happened in our province? I mean, even in Alexandra, it was just 2 people who were killed during a robbery. The other 4 were just ambushed in a taxi randomly, with people apparently pretending to stop the taxi to go somewhere. And then, is South Africa numb to areas such as Cape Town, where at some point Nyanga was called the murder capital of the country, and we so used to the Cape Flats and murders happening there. You've, for instance, investigated violence in South Africa for decades. So what do you think it is in terms of other provinces? Is it a heightened reporting that's making people more aware, or has this always been our problem?
Well, it's always been, we've always had problems with these kind of mass shootings or mass murders or multiple murders that have been happening. I mean, the one thing that we've seen certainly that the police have been bringing out more regular data or statistics on this. So we've seen in terms of the quarterly data they've brought out over the past sort of 9 months that there seems to have been an increase in multiple murders, namely number of people dying at the hands of one perpetrator or a group of perpetrators. But it's difficult to get a handle on exactly what's driving that. But I think a lot of their internal dynamics behind a lot of this violence and the internal dynamics, it's that, for example, what average citizens, law-abiding citizens in South Africa experience kind of economic pinch. It's tough times for South Africans, but the same applies to organized criminal groups. So the sense of around it does become the competition is a lot fiercer and violence is used to manage that.
Yeah.
But also we've seen that, groups have always been particularly violent, but I think we're sort of seeing the use of more gratuitous violence. Violence seems to be used in a lot more kind of common way these days. So there's a lot more violence used in the case of robberies, and it also seems to be a way in which disputes are settled, and it's this kind of recourse to violence. So we've always had these norms that promote violence, and it seems to have been escalated in recent years.
Yeah. So very quickly, what do you recommend we do then? Are police also part of the problem in terms of not only the fact that your Norwood police station, for instance, where guns just went missing and no one reported it, but also the fact that, the ratio between police and citizens is also so, the gap is so large, etc. So what do you recommend we do?
Well, I mean, there's some things that can be done in the short to medium term, and a lot of it has to do really around what the police can do. So the police have resources, but obviously resource constrained in certain areas, and you get very dedicated police who are doing a good job, but then you get obviously some bad apples sitting in some police stations who are responsible for corruption. But the police are trying to clamp down on illegal firearms, and that needs to obviously be prioritized and continue to work on that and focus on the areas where the police know that firearm crime is bad and it's at its highest, where it knows that these kind of groups are operating, to focus on that. Obviously to try and boost crime intelligence capability, because there's been crises within it for a number of years. And so there have been improvements in recent months, but there certainly needs to be prioritized going forward. And then obviously we need to figure out ways in which to prevent the flow of legal guns into the hands of criminals.
Yeah.
And so there's a big discussion around how you do that through the law. So there's, conversations about should we be, kind of making stricter gun laws come into effect.
Yeah.
So that's where the conversation sits at the moment.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Guy Lamb, a criminologist. I think I've heard him so many times. I'm sure he's even fatigued by saying the same thing all the time in terms of the solutions to our crime, but it doesn't seem to be curbing it at all.